Hello dear students, myself Dr. Sachin Gurule, Assistant Professor from Department of Zoology, KTHM College, Nasik. In the previous video of subject animal diversity, we have started with the chapter number 2, that is Introduction to Class Aves. And in the third lecture, we have learned the flight adaptation in the birds. Now in this video, we are going to learn the types of beak present into the birds. So let's see. Now enormous diversification in habit and habitat of the birds have made them highly successful vertebrate taxon with high adaptive capabilities. So this is again due to the diversification in the habit and habitat. The birds also shows a great diversification in their food and feeding habit also. And this diversification in food and feeding habit leads them to develop a various kinds of the modification in their beak. Now beak is another characteristic feature of the bird, which is actually the modification of the upper and lower jaw. So the beak has to serve in case of the birds both as a mouth and as a hand, because the forelimbs in case of the birds, they are get modified into the wings, and hence the function of the food capturing in case of the birds can be compensated by the beak, the modification of the beak only. So beak or the bill is obviously the characteristic features present in all the birds, which is the modification of upper and the lower jaws. The beak is elongated and it is covered by the horny sheath. This horny sheath is referred as the rhamphotheca. Okay, the beak, it is useful for the various purposes. It is useful for the purpose of eating. It is useful for the purpose of the grooming, then manipulating the objects, killing the prey, fighting, probing for the food, courtship, and the feeding the young ones. So beaks in the birds, they are variously modified, and what kind of the necessity is there, accordingly that they are get adapted and they are performing a different kinds of the function. The form, size and shape of the beak greatly varies in the different kinds of the birds. And if you see the different types of the beak, there are about 12 kinds of the beaks can be recognized among the different kinds of the birds. The types of the beak are as follows. The seed-eating beak, which is known as the granivorous beak, which is the characteristic of the beak present into the seed-feeding insect like sparrow, finch or the cardinal. Then second one is a cutting beak, is found into the birds like a crow. Then fruit-eating beak is a characterized by having a hook at their tip for piercing the fruit, and is present into the birds like a parrot and the parrot and the kingfisher. Then insectivorous beak is found into the birds which are feeding on the insect. Then fish catching beak, useful for catching the fish. Wood chiseling beak is found into the woodpecker. Then tearing and piercing beak is a characteristic of the carnivorous bird. Mud probing beak is again found into the birds which are probing the mud for finding their prey. Then water straining beak is present into the birds like that of the duck and the flamingo, where they sieve the water for separating the zooplanktons and the phytoplanktons present into the water. Then spatulate beak, pouched beak and the flower probing beak. So these are the different types of the beaks you will find among the birds. So let's see one by one. First of all, start with the seed eating or so called as a granivorous beak. Now seed eating beak is comparatively the short and it is a stout peg like, conical in shape and pointed at the tip. So here if you see the diagram, they are provided with a small and the short beak, but though it is the short, but it is stout enough, is a peg like and the conical in shape, and if you see the pointed end, it is quite pointed. Now the weaker beak, they are useful for piercing the small seeds, whereas the powerful beak, when it is present, it is meant for crushing the large and hard shelled seeds or the fruit stones. Now this type of the beak is a characteristic of the seed eating or the granivorous birds such as the sparrow, then finch and the cardinal. So all these are the birds which are feeding on the seeds, uh, and they are provided with a stout conical beak which is known as a seed eating beak. Then second beak is known as the cutting beak. Now cutting and the biting type of the beak is comparatively longer than that of the seed eating beak. Then it is strong and they are provided with a horny edges. So if you see, the beak is comparatively elongated one and it is provided with a sharp horny edges. This horny edges is responsible for the cutting the food material. Okay, the beak is laterally compressed with the pointed tip which can be useful for the various purposes. Now this type of the beak is characteristic of the birds like a crow and the raven, where we will found a comparatively the longer and the strong beak which are provided with a edges, horny edges. Okay, so this is about the cutting kind of the beak. The next type of the beak is the fruit eating beak. Now fruit eating beak is large, is a sharp one. Often it is provided with a hook and they are extremely strong. So here in the diagram you can see the comparatively large beak is there, okay, and it is somewhat curved, and if you see the pointed side or the uppermost side of the beak, it is quite hooked. Now the beak is adapted for the ganoing or breaking open the hard seeds or the nuts, and hence such a kind of the beak is useful for the feeding on the fruit. Now among the hornbill, the beak is comparatively large and it appears very heavy, but actually the beak is not heavy and they are provided with a cellular structure into its inner region, and though it is looking a heavy, but actually it is the lighter because of they were provided with a cellular structure from its inner region. Now this cellular structure present into the beak, they are act as a resonator, and this resonator is responsible for producing the exceptionally loud cry. So for producing a huge sound, again you will find the beak which is provided with that cellular structure which is acting as a resonator. Then the fruit eating beak is found into the birds like a parrot, then cockatoo and the hornbills. Okay, so all these are the birds which are feeding on the fruits, and the beak is useful for the piercing the fruit also. So this is about the fruit eating beak. The next one is the insectivorous beak. Now in the insectivorous beak is a characteristic of the birds like a swifts, then swallows, flycatchers, hoops, etc. And it is also found into the frogmouth, robin. Okay, in insectivorous beak, in case of the hoop, okay, the beak is comparatively long, is a slender, and it is slightly curved. So here in the diagram you can see the beak is somewhat the longer in size, is a slender one, and it is slightly curved, and this kind of the beak is adapted for the turning the leaves and probing into the soil for the insect larvae, pupae, and the mites, which are generally hide under the substratum. So which can be useful for the probing, and when the insects which are larvae or the pupae, they are hide under the soil, when they are comes out with the help of that beak, these birds pick up that insects and feeds on that insect. Now in case of the swallows and the frogmouth, so here you can see the frogmouth bird. Okay, the beak is comparatively smaller in size, and it is the wide and delicate to prey upon the flying insects. So again the beak is here broad and useful for the capturing the flying insects. Now in the flycatchers, the beak is small, strong, with notched mandibles at the tip end. Then reticle bristles are also present at the base of beak. So here you can see the reticle bristles are present at the basal region of the beak, which is again a features which is found among the insectivorous beak. An example of the birds which are provided with the insectivorous beak is hoop, robin, and the frogmouth. The next one is the fish catching beak. The fish catching beak is long, is a powerful one, and sharply pointed, found into the strokes, herons, and the kingfisher. In case of the cormorant, where they also provided with a fish catching beak, the beak is quite longer. So here you can see the longer beak. It is a narrow and slightly curved at the tip. So if you see the apical region here in the diagram, it is the curved at the tip, and they have provided with a lateral tooth-like processes, and these tooth-like processes, they are adapted for capturing the fishes. So this kind of the beak is useful for capturing the fishes. Now another one in a bird, that is in the snake bird. The snake bird is also referred as the Indian darter. Okay, so these lateral tooth-like processes over the beak are in the form of needle-like processes. Okay, so the lateral processes or the tooth-like processes that occurs into the Indian darter, they are in the needle-like form among the Indian darter. Now in the kingfisher, the beak is long. Here you can see in the diagram. Then it is a powerful, sharply pointed, and this kind of the beak is again useful for capturing the fishes. Not only fishes, but they are also useful for feeding, capturing the frog, tadpole, smaller mollusk organism, and other aquatic animals. And for that purpose, they are provided with a beak which is of type, that is fish catching beak. The next one is the wood chiseling kind of the beak. The wood chiseling beak are long, is again the straight one, stout, but most importantly the beak is a chisel like and is strongly articulated with that of the skull. Now the skull bone also have a thick and the shock absorbent neck muscles are the strong, and they are highly developed, and so that this kind of the beak is useful for chiseling and drilling into the bark or into the wood of the tree, and this is for constructing their nest and also for searching the hidden insect prey under the wood. Means there are two roles of this wood chiseling beak. First one is useful for preparing the nest into the wood or into the bark of the tree, and secondly, whatever insect larvae or the pupae which are hide under the stems of the plant, by knocking that wood under which that insects are hidden, so that can be useful for deterring the insects so that they can reach up to their prey, that is the insects, for feeding on the insect again. So this type of the beak is a peculiarity of the birds which is commonly known as the woodpecker. So woodpecker, they are provided with a wood chiseling kind of the beak. The next one is the tearing and the piercing kind of the beak. Now this tearing and piercing beak is a specialty of the carnivorous birds such as the vulture, hawk, owl, kites and eagles. So all these are the examples of the carnivorous birds which are feeding on the carrion as well as the flesh. And to remove the flesh from the bones, they are provided with a very strong beak, which is often provided with a very sharp hook, which is a characteristic of the tearing and piercing beak. Now the beak is short, is a pointed and powerful, sharp edged and hooked at the tip, and is adapted for tearing the flesh and operated by well developed mandibular muscles. So the tearing and piercing beak is a peculiarity of the carnivore birds like vultures and the eagles. So here in the diagram you can see the beak is quite short, it is highly pointed at the tip, and it is heavily built. Particularly if you see the beak of the vulture is powerfully built, and it is so strong just to remove the flesh from the bones. So this is about the tearing and the piercing kind of the beak. The next one is the mud probing beak. The mud probing beak is extremely long, slender and slightly curved to probe the mud deeply in search of aquatic worms and the larvae. Means actually this kind of the beak is just useful for probing the mud, as below the mud often the small aquatic worms and the larvae of the insects, they are generally hide, and to search that aquatic worms and the larvae which are hide under the mud, that beak is useful for probing the mud so that the birds can able to approach towards the their food, that is nothing but the worm and the larvae. The mud probing beak is found into the birds like a stilt, then snipes, sandpiper, jacana, lapwing and curlews, etc. So all these are the birds which are generally present into the marshy places. So where there is a much mud is there due to the presence of the extragenous water, and the insects and the aquatic worms which are hide under the mud can be probed using their beak. Now some of these birds are remarkable for slenderness and extreme length of their beak also. So for example, if you see the stilt, they are provided with a comparatively very long and very slender beak, and this beak is useful for probing the mud. So this is about the mud probing beak. The next one is the water and the mud straining beak. The water and mud straining beak is a broad, flat, and the margins of the jaws are provided with a transverse lamellae. So here in the diagram you can see the transverse lamellae are present in the beak. These transverse lamellae, they are also known as the horny serrations, and these horny serrations or the transverse lamellae making it the efficient filter or the sieve. So actually this transverse lamellae or the horny serration, they are acting as a biological sieve into the beak of such a kind of the birds for straining the water or straining the mud. Now due to the presence of the transverse lamellae on the margin of the jaws, the mud and water, it passes out leaving the food into mouth cavity only. Okay, so in this way they capture their food from that transverse lamellae. They can remove the water and the mud, and only their food material is get trapped within their mouth. Now this type of the beak is commonly found into the birds like a duck, teals, geese and the flamingo. Among the flamingo, the beak is distally decurved, okay, and the two valves of the lower jaws are enlarged to form a wide cavity that is covered over the upper jaw. So here you can see the lower beak is highly modified, or they are provided with a two valves and it becomes a enlarged. So due to the enlargement of the lower beak, they forms a wide cavity within a beak, and so that again they are provided with a transverse lamellae which can be used as a sieve. So this is about the water and the mud straining beak. The next one is a spatulate beak. It is known as a spatulate beak because it looks like that of the spatula, okay, or it is the spoon. Now the spatulate kind of the bill is a characteristic feature of the birds which is commonly known as the spoon bill. Okay, so the beak is flattened throughout its length, but it terminates into the broad spatulate or the spoon-like expansion which is meant for dabbing into the water and the mud in search of the insects, worms, fishes, mollusks and other smaller animals which are hide under the water or into the mud. So here you can see the comparatively long size and the spatulate beak is there, which is the flat throughout their length, but at the terminal portion it becomes a broad and the spatulate or the spoon like structure, and hence is also known as the spoonbill. Okay, the bird is a spoonbill and the beak is known as the spatulate kind of the beak. So next one is the pouched beak. The pouched beak is a characteristic feature of the birds which is known as the pelicans. Okay, so all the pelicans, they are provided with such a kind of the pouch at the lower jaw, which is actually the gular pouch. The beak is considerably large, having a large gular pouch. So here in the diagram you can see the large gular pouch is there, and this gular pouch is an extension of the skin attached to the lower mandible in the sense the lower jaw, for storing the engulfed fishes. So whatever fishes which are engulfed, which are temporarily stored into this gular pouch, and as they are provided with a such a mandibular pouch, and this beak is known as the pouched beak, which is a characteristic of the birds known as the pelican. And the last kind of the beak which is found in among the birds like a hummingbird, that is the flower probing beak. Now, if you see the flower probing beak is comparatively very long and narrow. It is pointed at the tip, and this kind of the beak is useful for probing the flower for sucking the nectar. So here you can see the hummingbird is comparatively very small bird. They can able to fly constantly at the same place, and they insert the very long beak into the tubular flower, and this kind of the modification is found for sucking the nectar. Now accordingly, what kind of the flowers from which the nectars are sucked, and according to the length of the siphon of that flower, the length of the beak is also elongated one. So it is found into the hummingbird, which becomes a stationary in air over the flower for sucking the nectar, and their beak is slightly decurved and adapted for such a kind of the function. So they are provided with a very long beak. So this is known as the flower probing beak. So in this way, in this video we have learned the different kinds of the beak modification found into the birds, that is belongs to the class Aves. I hope all of you understand the types of beak. In the next lecture we are going to learn the feet modification into the birds. So thank you very much.